The summer air in Georgia hangs heavy, a humid blanket that clings to the skin and slows the breath. In the late 1970s, Atlanta was a city on the rise, a beacon of the New South, calling itself the city too busy to hate. It was a time of transition, of political shifts, and of a booming population. But beneath the veneer of progress and the sweltering heat of the sun, a darkness was festering. It was a darkness that would snatch the innocent from the streets, leaving empty bedrooms and shattered families in its wake. It would paralyze a metropolis with fear, institute curfews that turned bustling neighborhoods into ghost towns, and leave a scar on the American psyche that has never fully healed. Between 1979 and 1981, at least 28 African American children, adolescents, and young adults vanished, only to be found discarded in woods, rivers, and abandoned buildings. This was a siege not by an army, but by a phantom. Welcome to DCF Investigations. Today we are walking into the heart of one of the most complex, controversial, and heartbreaking chapters in true crime history. This is the exhaustive story of the Atlanta child murders. To understand the terror that gripped Atlanta, we must first understand the atmosphere of the city in 1979. Maynard Jackson had been elected as the first black mayor of a major southern city, symbolizing a shift in power and a hope for equality. But economic disparity remained stark. Many of the victims lived in low-income housing projects, areas where children played in the streets and neighbors looked out for one another. It was a time when parents felt a certain degree of safety in their communities, a trust that was about to be irrevocably broken. The nightmare began quietly, almost imperceptibly, on a path that would eventually be known as the road to nowhere. On July 21st, 1979, a woman searching for aluminum cans in an overgrown lot off Niskey Lake Road made a gruesome discovery. Hidden amidst the kudzu and the debris were the bodies of two boys. They were 14-year-old Edward Hope Smith and 13-year-old Alfred Evans. Edward had been missing for a week. He was a quiet boy, known to his friends as Teddy. He had disappeared while walking home from a skating rink, a common pastime for the youth of the area. Alfred had been missing for 3 days. The initial police reaction was not one of alarm for a serial predator. At the time, the deaths were classified as drug-related or the result of a personal dispute. The authorities did not immediately link them. In the sweltering heat of July, the city moved on, unaware that the clock had started ticking. Months passed. The leaves turned, and the air grew colder. But the silence from the killer was merely a pause. In November 1979, 9-year-old Yusuf Bell went to the store to buy snuff for a neighbor. He was a bright, energetic child. He never returned. His body was found weeks later in an abandoned schoolhouse, a place where children should have been learning, not decaying. The cause of death was strangulation. It was here that the whispers began. 3 boys, all black, all from similar neighborhoods, all dead. But the official police stance remained skeptical of a pattern. Runaways, they said. Family trouble. The parents knew better. Camille Bell, Yusuf's mother, would soon become a ferocious advocate, a voice that refused to be silenced by bureaucracy. As 1980 dawned, the pace of the disappearances accelerated, turning the whispers into a scream. In March, 12-year-old Angel Linaire was found bound to a tree, strangled. She was the first female victim attributed to the spree. though her inclusion in the official list would later be debated. Then came Jeffrey Mathis, Eric Middlebrooks, and Christopher Richardson. The ages varied, but the profile was terrifyingly consistent. They were young, black, and vulnerable. By the summer of 1980, the community was at a boiling point. The police were accused of indifference, of not caring because the victims were poor and black. In response to the mounting pressure, the missing children's parents formed the Committee to Stop Children's Murders, known simply as STOP. They held rallies, they spoke to the press, and they demanded that the city protect its young. The psychological toll on Atlanta was immense. A citywide curfew was enacted. The image of the time is haunting. Empty playgrounds at dusk, parents gripping their children's hands with white-knuckled intensity, and the police cruisers prowling the streets. The phrase, "It's 10 p.m., do you know where your children are?" took on a sinister, literal weight. The local news opened every night with a count of the missing and the dead. The Bat Patrols were formed, groups of bat-wielding fathers and community members patrolling their own neighborhoods, determined to catch the monster themselves if the police could not. By late 1980, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had joined the hunt. The case had become a national obsession. President Ronald Reagan eventually approved federal funding to aid the investigation. A massive task force was assembled, comprised of Atlanta police, state investigators, and federal agents. They chased thousands of leads. They looked at everyone: known sex offenders, local peddlers, family members, and even members of the Ku Klux Klan. The volume of data was overwhelming. Computer systems of the era were pushed to their limits, trying to cross-reference the tips flooding in. The profile of the killer began to take shape. FBI profilers, including the legendary John Douglas, arrived in Atlanta. They theorized that the killer was likely a black male, largely because a white man entering these tight-knit African-American neighborhoods to abduct children would have stood out and been noticed immediately. This profile was controversial. Many in the community believed the murders were racially motivated hate crimes committed by white supremacists. The idea that one of their own was hunting their children was a pill too bitter to swallow. The investigation was also fighting against the lack of physical evidence. The bodies were often found days or weeks after death, decomposed and stripped of clues by the elements. There were no witnesses to the abductions. No weapon was ever found. Strangulation and asphyxiation were the primary methods of killing. The killer was a ghost, leaving nothing behind but the bodies. However, forensic science was about to play a pivotal, albeit contentious, role. As bodies were recovered, trace evidence analysts began to notice something minute on the clothing and skin of the victims: fibers, microscopic strands of carpet and animal hair. Specifically, they found unusual yellowish-green nylon fibers and violet acetate fibers. These weren't common threads. They were distinct. The task force began to hope that if they could find the source of these fibers, they could find the killer. By the spring of 1981, the body count had risen to over 20. The pressure on the task force was crushing. They needed a break. They needed the killer to make a mistake. The investigators noticed a pattern in the body dump sites. The killer seemed to favor water. Several recent victims had been found in or near rivers. Based on this, the task force devised a desperate and high-stakes plan. They would stake out the bridges crossing the Chattahoochee River. For weeks, Officers sat in the dark, watching the water, battling mosquitoes and fatigue. It was a needle in a haystack operation. Then, in the early morning hours of May 22nd, 1981, the breakthrough happened. A surveillance team stationed under the James Jackson Parkway Bridge heard a loud splash. It was the sound of something heavy hitting the water. Moments later, a white Chevrolet station wagon drove slowly across the bridge and turned around. The police intercepted the vehicle. Behind the wheel was a 23-year-old freelance photographer and aspiring music promoter named Wayne Bertram Williams. Williams was calm. Too calm, some officers noted. He told them he was checking out the address of a woman he was supposed to audition the next day. He claimed he was in the music business. The officers, having no probable cause to detain him at that exact moment, no body had been found yet, let him go, but not before taking his information and noting his demeanor. 2 days later, the body of 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater surfaced downstream, just a few miles from the bridge. The medical examiner determined he had died of asphyxiation. The splash the officers heard was now believed to be Cater's body hitting the river. Wayne Williams became the prime suspect. The investigation into Wayne Williams revealed a complex character. He was an only child, doted on by his parents, both respected teachers. He was intelligent, articulate, but also described by some as arrogant and a pathological liar. He had a history of impersonating police officers and had built a radio station in his parents' home. He drove around the city, often attempting to recruit young men for a musical group he was forming called Gemini. This gave him a plausible reason to be interacting with the demographic of the victims. The police obtained search warrants for Williams' home and vehicle. This is where the case shifted from a manhunt to a battle of microscopic evidence. Inside the Williams home, investigators found carpeting that looked remarkably like the fibers found on the victims. The carpet was a specific brand and color, Wellman 1817, a Luxor pattern in English olive. The prosecution's case against Wayne Williams would not rely on eyewitnesses seeing him kill anyone. It would rely on the laws of probability and the science of fiber analysis. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Crime Lab, along with FBI experts, conducted an exhaustive comparison. They matched fibers found on 12 of the victims to items from Williams' environment. The green carpet in his home, the bedspread on his bed, the carpet in his station wagon, and even hairs from the family dog, a German Shepherd mix. The trial of Wayne Williams began in early 1982 and was a media circus. It was one of the first high-profile trials to rely so heavily on fiber evidence. The prosecution argued that the odds of any other person in Atlanta having that specific combination of carpeting, vehicle upholstery, and dog hair were astronomical. They presented charts and diagrams, linking victim after victim to Williams through these microscopic threads. They also introduced pattern evidence. Although Williams was formally charged only with the murders of the two adults, Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne, the judge allowed the prosecution to introduce evidence regarding 10 other victims to show a pattern of behavior. This was a devastating blow to the defense. It painted Williams not just as the killer of 2 men, but as the monster who had been hunting the city's children. Williams took the stand in his own defense, a move that many legal experts consider fatal. Initially, he was composed, denying any involvement. But under the relentless cross-examination by prosecutor Jack Mallard, Williams' mask slipped. He became angry, combative, and arrogant. He lashed out, calling the prosecutor a fool and displaying a temper that the jury could easily envision turning violent. On February 27, 1982, after 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found Wayne Williams guilty of the murders of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. Following the conviction, the police commissioner announced that 22 other cases in the Atlanta child murders investigation would be closed, attributed to Williams. The logic was that the pattern was the same. The fiber evidence linked them, and with Williams behind bars, the killings had stopped. For the city of Atlanta, it was an official end to the nightmare. But for the families of the victims, and for many observers, it was a hollow resolution. Wayne Williams maintained his innocence from day one, and he continues to do so to this day. He claims he was a scapegoat, a convenient black man chosen to satisfy the public's demand for an arrest and to prevent a race war. This brings us to the massive, sprawling world of conspiracy theories and alternative suspects that has shadowed this case for decades. The most prominent theory involves the Ku Klux Klan. During the investigation, there were reports and tips suggesting that the murders were part of a KKK plot to ignite a race war. Specifically, the Sanders family theory has gained significant traction over the years. A police informant had reported that members of the Sanders family, who were associated with the Klan, had expressed a desire to kill black children. There were transcripts of conversations that were deeply disturbing, mentioning specific methods of killing that matched some of the victims. However, this line of inquiry was allegedly suppressed. The argument goes that city officials, desperate to maintain the peace and Atlanta's reputation, did not want to admit that a white supremacist group was slaughtering black children. Admitting that could have burned the city to the ground. Supporters of Williams point to the fact that the victims' profiles varied. Some were street-smart hustlers, others were gentle homebodies. Some were strangled, others bludgeoned, others stabbed. Could one man really be responsible for such a diverse array of crimes? Could one man operate for 2 years, kidnapping nearly 30 people, without leaving a shred of physical evidence at the crime scenes other than fibers? Furthermore, there is the issue of the closed cases. Wayne Williams was never tried for the murders of the children. The 22 cases attributed to him were simply cleared administratively. This denied the families of those children their day in court. It denied them the specific answers regarding their own sons and daughters. For decades, mothers like Camille Bell lived with the official narrative that Williams killed their children, but without the judicial proof to back it up. In the years since the trial, doubts have persisted. In 2005, DeKalb County Police Chief Louis Graham ordered the reopening of the murder cases of 5 boys that had occurred in his jurisdiction, cases that had been attributed to Williams. Graham stated publicly that he did not believe Williams was responsible for those deaths. However, the investigation yielded no new charges and was eventually quieted. Then, in 2019, a new chapter opened. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and Police Chief Erica Shields announced that evidence from the Atlanta child murders would be re-examined using modern DNA technology. This was a bombshell. Technology had advanced light years since 1982. Touch DNA, mitochondrial DNA testing, and genetic genealogy now offered possibilities that were science fiction during the original investigation. The goal was not necessarily to exonerate Wayne Williams, but to provide certainty. The city wanted to know if modern science could definitively link the victims to Williams, or if it would point to someone else. As of now, the results of this re-examination have been guarded. The process is slow, dealing with degraded evidence that is over 40 years old. In some cases, the physical evidence has been lost or destroyed over the decades. A tragic reality of cold casework. However, recent updates have trickled out. In 2021, investigators revealed that they had successfully extended the DNA testing to include hairs found on the bodies. The hope is to distinguish between the victims, the suspects, and incidental contamination. The legacy of the Atlanta child murders is a heavy one. It changed the way children were raised in America. The concept of stranger danger became a national curriculum. It changed policing, highlighting the need for better interagency cooperation and the use of computer databases to track serial offenders. But beyond the procedural changes, the human cost remains the most palpable element. We must remember the names: Edward, Alfred, Yusuf, Milton, Angel, Jeffrey, Patrick, Kenneth, Darren, Charles, Aaron, Curtis, Luby, Terry, Latonia, and so many others. These were children with favorite toys, with crushes, with dreams of being astronauts or musicians. They were stolen. The tragedy is compounded by the lingering ambiguity. If Wayne Williams is indeed a serial killer who murdered nearly 30 children, then he is one of the most prolific monsters in American history. If he is innocent, or only guilty of the 2 adults he was convicted for, then a predator, or predators, walked free, perhaps living out their lives in the very community they terrorized. There's also the possibility of a middle ground, a theory that suggests Williams was a killer, but not the only killer. Perhaps he was responsible for some, while others were victims of copycats, family violence, or other predators taking advantage of the chaos. This multiple killers theory would explain the inconsistencies in the modus operandi and the victim profiles. As we stand here today, looking back at the road to nowhere, the case remains a complex web of grief, science, politics, and race. The retesting of evidence offers a glimmer of hope for finality, but it also threatens to reopen old wounds. The story of the Atlanta child murders is not just a story of death. It is a story of a city fighting for its soul. It is a story of mothers who refuse to let their children be forgotten. It is a cautionary tale about the rush to judgment and the heavy burden of justice. As the DNA testing continues, we wait. We wait to see if the ghosts of 1979 will finally speak. We wait to see if the fibers of truth can withstand the test of time. This has been a deep dive into one of the darkest eras in American history. The fear was real, the loss was immeasurable, and the questions remain. I want to thank you for joining me on this journey into the archives of DCF Investigations. We strive to shine a light on the cases that define us, the mysteries that haunt us, and the pursuit of truth that drives us. Now, I turn the question to you. Do you believe Wayne Williams was the sole perpetrator of the Atlanta child murders? Or do you believe, as many families do, that other killers walked free while the city rushed to close the case? Share your thoughts, your theories, and your questions in the comments below. The conversation is far from over. Until next time, stay observant.